I set the table for 6 people on my 76th birthday. 6 plates, 6 glasses, 6 napkins folded the way my late wife taught me 40 years ago. By 7:30, every chair was still empty. Then my phone buzzed. Not a call, a photo sent to the wrong chat by mistake. My son, his wife, my grandkids, all dressed up at some fancy restaurant with her parents. The caption underneath it read, "So glad we didn't have to sit through another boring dinner. With Walter tonight, LOL. Not Dad, not Grandpa. Walter." I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone screaming. Blew out all 76 candles by myself. Picked up my phone and texted my attorney one line. "I need to see you first thing tomorrow. It's important." Because what my family didn't know, sitting at that restaurant laughing about how boring I was that I still owned every single building their entire business was standing on. And by the time they figured that out, it was already too late. My name is Walter Hayes. I'm 76 years old. I set the table for 6 that evening. 6 plates, 6 glasses, 6 cloth napkins, folded the way my late wife Dorothy taught me 40 years ago. The corner tucked just so. It was my birthday, and for the first time since she passed, I actually felt like celebrating. I spent the whole morning cooking. Pot roast, the way my son Ryan used to beg for as a kid. Mashed potatoes, lemon cake, from Dorothy's handwritten recipe card, the one with the coffee stain in the corner. At 6 o'clock, no one had arrived. At 6:30, I texted Ryan. "Still coming, son." Nothing. At 7, I called. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. At 7:30, I sat alone at the head of the table, 6 empty chairs around me, and finally understood. Nobody was coming. I didn't cry. Sat there in the quiet of my dining room, looked at the cake with its unlit candles, and felt something colder than sadness settle into my chest. Then my phone buzzed. Not a call, a photo, accidentally sent to a family group chat I was apparently still part of, though clearly no one remembered that. A picture from a restaurant, crystal chandeliers, champagne glasses, my son Ryan, my daughter-in-law Vanessa, my grandchildren, all dressed up, sitting with Vanessa's parents. The caption, meant for someone else, read, "So glad we didn't have to sit through another boring dinner with Walter tonight, lol." I read it 3 times. Boring dinner with Walter, not Dad, not Grandpa, Walter. I set the phone down beside the cake and felt something I hadn't expected on my own birthday. Clarity. I scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in almost 2 years. Patricia Cole, attorney at law. "Patricia, it's Walter Hayes. I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. It's important." Her reply came within a minute. "Of course, Walter. Everything all right?" I looked around my dining room. 6 plates, 6 empty chairs, a cake nobody would ever taste. "It will be," I typed back. "Tomorrow it will be." I blew out all 76 candles myself, one long breath at a time, and as the last one went dark, I made a wish that had nothing to do with hope and everything to do with resolve. I had spent my whole life being generous with people who had started mistaking my kindness for something they were owed. That was about to change. Most people in this town know me as the old man who used to run. Hayes Family Diner on Route 9, the one with the red awning and the pie case by the register. What most people don't know is what came after. I opened that first diner in 1974 with $1,100 and a second-hand grill that only worked if you hit it in the right spot. Dorothy waited tables while she was pregnant with Ryan. We lived in 2 rooms above the restaurant for the first 3 years because we couldn't afford anything else. By the time Ryan was in high school, we'd opened a second location. By the time he graduated college, a third. Dorothy handled the books. I handled everything else. 16-hour days, 7 days a week, for the better part of 3 decades. We built something, not just restaurants, a name. 4 locations across the county, each one profitable, each one built from nothing but stubbornness and early mornings. Dorothy passed away 6 years ago. Cancer, slow and impossible to bargain with. Before she died, she made me promise one thing. Walter, don't let Ryan run this business until he understands what it actually costs to build something, not the money, the years. Promised her. When Ryan turned 35 and asked to take over daily operations, I let him. Stepped back. I let him rebrand 2 locations, update the menus, bring in consultants. What I never did was give him the deeds. Every Hayes Family Diner location, the buildings and the land beneath them, remained in a holding company Dorothy and I created. Back in 1998, after a lawsuit from a slippery parking lot nearly bankrupted us, Ryan knew the holding company existed. He simply never asked who controlled it. The answer was me, only me. It had always been me. Ryan built his identity around being the man who was going to inherit Hayes Family Diner. He told investors, quietly, that when my father retires fully, the properties transfer to me automatically. Nothing was automatic. He had simply never asked, and I had never corrected him, because some part of me still hoped he would one day ask how I built it, instead of when he'd get to keep it. That night, after the photo, after the cake, after 76 candles blown out alone, I sat in my study and pulled out the same folder Dorothy and I had created 28 years earlier. Tomorrow, I would touch it again. Patricia Cole's office smelled like fresh coffee and old law books, exactly the way it had for the 15 years she'd handled my affairs. She was maybe 50, sharp-eyed, the kind of attorney who read every line twice before she trusted it. She looked at me over her glasses the moment I sat down. "You look tired, Walter." "I am tired," I admitted. Tired of being an afterthought in my own family. I told her everything. The empty chairs, the uneaten cake, the text message that wasn't meant for me. She listened without interrupting, taking notes in small, precise handwriting. When I finished, she set down her pen. "What do you want to do?" "I want to understand exactly what I own," I said. "Not what everyone assumes I own. What the paperwork actually says." Patricia pulled a thick file from her cabinet, labeled Hayes Holdings, LLC. She spent the next hour walking me through documents I'd technically signed but hadn't truly studied in years. The 4 diner properties, all owned by the holding company, 2 listed members, me and Dorothy, whose shares had transferred fully to me upon her death. Ryan's name appeared nowhere on the ownership documents. Not 1%. He has an employment agreement as general manager, Patricia said. But Walter, he does not own any part of this business. He runs it. That's a very different thing. He doesn't know that, I said quietly. Patricia looked at me for a long moment. Are you sure? Because based on what you've told me about the investors he's been talking to, it sounds like he's been operating as though he does. That landed harder than I expected. There's something else, Patricia said, pulling out a newer document dated 4 months earlier. Your son submitted a loan application last spring, using the Dinah properties as collateral. Did you know about this? I hadn't. My stomach tightened. Did it go through? It's pending. The bank is verifying collateral ownership. She met my eyes. When they run that verification, they're going to find your name on every deed. Not his. I sat back, the weight of it settling slowly. Ryan hadn't just taken me for granted at a birthday dinner. He'd built financial promises on a foundation that didn't exist. What do you want to do? Patricia asked, softer this time. I thought about Dorothy's voice in that hospital room. Don't let Ryan run this business until he understands what it actually costs. I want to let the truth catch up with him, I said. On its own. I'm not going to lie for him anymore by staying silent. 3 days passed. Nobody from my family called. Not Ryan, not Vanessa, not even a text from my grandchildren, who usually sent me at least a birthday drawing or a voice memo singing off-key. I spent those 3 days doing something I hadn't done in years. I visited each of the 4 diners, unannounced, and simply sat in a booth with a cup of coffee, watching. At the Route 9 location, the original one, noticed the pie case was gone, replaced with a sleek refrigerated display that didn't match the rest of the decor. A manager I didn't recognize told me, cheerfully, that Ryan's been modernizing things. At the Millbrook location, I overheard 2 servers complaining quietly in the back about paychecks running late, 2 weeks in a row. Corporate cash flow issue, one of them said, rolling her eyes. Same as last month. Said nothing. I just listened, paid for my coffee and left. On the 4th day, my phone finally rang. Ryan's name on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello, Ryan. Dad. His voice had that tightness people get when they need something, but don't want to sound like they're asking. Listen, I know it's been a few days. Things have been crazy. Happy belated birthday to me, I said evenly. A pause. Right. Sorry about that, Dad. Vanessa's parents surprised us with that dinner and it felt rude to cancel last minute. You know how her dad gets. I saw the photo, Ryan. Silence. The one meant for someone else, I continued. The one calling dinner with me boring. He exhaled slowly. Dad, that wasn't meant for you to see. Vanessa was just venting. She didn't mean. I understand exactly what she meant, I said. That's not why I'm bringing it up. Then why? I looked out my kitchen window at the maple tree Dorothy had planted the year Ryan was born. Because I want you to know that I know. Not so you'll apologize. So you'll understand that from here forward, I'm paying attention. Dad, you're being dramatic. It was one dinner. It wasn't one dinner. Ryan, It was one photo that told me the truth about a lot of dinners. I kept my voice calm. Not angry. I want you to hear that clearly. Then what are you? I thought about the loan application, the unpaid pie case, the late paychecks nobody had explained. I'm paying attention, I said again. Tell Vanessa I hope her parents enjoyed the champagne. I hung up before he could respond. It happened on a Tuesday morning, exactly 11 days after my birthday. I was in my garden, pulling weeds from around Dorothy's rose bushes, when Patricia called. Walter, First Meridian Bank contacted my office this morning. She said, skipping any small talk. They're finalizing Ryan's loan application. Their underwriting department flagged a discrepancy in the collateral documentation. What kind of discrepancy? The applicant listed himself as sole owner of 4 commercial properties that are, according to public county records, owned entirely by Hayes Holdings LLC, of which you are the sole surviving member. Her tone stayed professional, but I could hear something underneath it. The bank wants to speak with the actual owner of record before proceeding. That's you, Walter. I sat back on my heels in the dirt. What did you tell them? I told them I'd need to consult with my client before releasing any statement. A pause. Walter, this isn't a small clerical issue. If the loan had gone through with false collateral information, that's bank fraud. Ryan could be facing serious legal exposure, not just an awkward conversation. The word fraud hung in the air between us, even over the phone. I thought about the little boy who used to sit on the diner counter after school, swinging his legs, doing homework while Dorothy refilled coffee cups. I thought about the grown man who'd sent a text calling dinner with me. Boring. What are my options? I asked. You could confirm to the bank that you're the true owner and let the loan be denied on its own merits. That protects Ryan from a fraud charge, technically, since the transaction never actually closes. Or you could stay silent and let this play out however it plays out. I looked toward my kitchen window. Dorothy's voice again. Don't let Ryan run this business until he understands what it actually costs. Call the bank, I said finally. Confirm the ownership. Stop the loan before it closes. I won't let him become a criminal over this. But Patricia, after that, I want a meeting. Ryan, Vanessa, and me, in your office. I think it's time everyone understood exactly what they've been assuming for years. I'll set it up, Patricia said. For what it's worth, I think that's the right call. I hung up, pulled off my gardening gloves, looked down at Dorothy's roses, blooming stubbornly despite the early chill. We're getting there, Dorothy, I said quietly, to no one but the flowers. Patricia's conference room felt smaller than I remembered, though I suspected that had more to do with the tension than the actual square footage. Ryan arrived first, in a suit that looked more expensive than anything he wore when he actually had money to spare. Vanessa followed a few minutes later, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, her expression already defensive before anyone had said a word. Dad. Ryan sat across from me, forcing a smile. What's this about? Patricia's assistant just said it was urgent. I let Patricia begin. She laid out documents across the table like a dealer fanning cards. The ownership records, the holding company agreement, The bank's letter regarding the flagged loan application. Ryan's face changed slowly as he read, the way a man's face changes when a floor he's been standing on turns, out to be painted air. "This has to be a mistake," he said, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Dad, we talked about this years ago. You said the diners would come to me." "I never said that, Ryan." I kept my voice level. "You assumed that." "There's a difference." Vanessa leaned forward. "So what? You're just going to take everything he's built? He's run those restaurants for 8 years. He's managed them," I corrected gently. "Managing something and owning something have never been the same thing. I built those diners with your mother-in-law, an exhausting year at a time, long before Ryan understood what a mortgage even was." "This feels like punishment," Ryan said. "No." I looked directly at him. "This is what happens when the truth finally catches up to an assumption. You told a bank you owned properties that belong to a company I control. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a decision, and it very nearly cost you your freedom." The room went quiet. "The loan is denied," Patricia said into the silence. "No charges will be filed because the transaction never actually closed. Walter made sure of that personally." Ryan looked at me, something shifting behind his eyes. "You stopped it? You could have let it go through and you'd have committed fraud, knowingly or not, and I would have watched my son face consequences I could have prevented." Shook my head. I wasn't going to stop protecting this family now, even after everything. "Even after the birthday," he said quietly. "Even after the birthday," I confirmed. Vanessa was crying now, quietly. "We didn't know," she whispered, "about any of it. We just thought." "You thought it was already yours," I finished. "It's exactly the problem." Ryan lowered his eyes. For the first time since he'd walked into Patricia's office, he looked less like a businessman and more like the little boy Dorothy and I had raised. "I'm sorry, Dad." The words came quietly, almost reluctantly, but after 76 years, I'd learned that an apology isn't measured by how quickly it's spoken. It's measured by what comes after. Folded my hands on the conference table. "Ryan, do you know what hurt the most?" He shook his head. "It wasn't the loan. It wasn't the assumptions. Wasn't even the text message." I paused. "It was the fact that your mother spent the last weeks of her life worrying about this exact moment." Ryan looked up. "What do you mean?" I reached into my leather folder and slowly removed a single envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. Across the front, in Dorothy's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 simple words. "For Ryan, but not yet." Ryan's face immediately changed. "Mom wrote that?" He nodded. 3 days before she passed. His hands trembled as I slid the envelope across the table. "I've carried it with me for 6 years. I promised her I wouldn't give it to you until I believed you were finally ready to read it." Ryan stared at the envelope, but didn't touch it, almost as if he was afraid of what it might say. Vanessa quietly reached for his hand. He didn't notice. Finally, he opened it. Inside was a single handwritten page. Ryan began reading silently. Halfway down, his lips stopped moving. His breathing changed. A few seconds later, A tear landed on the paper, then another. He covered his mouth with one hand. Vanessa whispered. What did she say? Ryan couldn't answer. He simply handed her the letter. She read it aloud. My sweet boy, if you're reading this, then your father believes you're finally ready to hear something I never found the courage to say while I was alive. One day you'll inherit many things from us. I only pray the last thing you inherit is the belief that any of it belongs to you simply because your name is Hayes. Respect isn't inherited. Trust isn't inherited. Neither is character. If you ever begin counting your father's buildings before you, begin counting his sacrifices. You've already become poorer than you realize. Please, don't wait until I'm gone to understand what your father gave up for you. Love. Mom. The room fell completely silent. Even Patricia quietly removed her glasses. Ryan carefully folded the letter, as though it were made of glass. Then he looked at me, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I held his gaze. No, you don't. The words hit him harder than if I'd shouted. But forgiveness, I continued quietly, isn't something you earn. It's something another person chooses to give. Ryan lowered his head again. Then, for the first time in his adult life, he began crying, not because he'd lost a loan, not because the bank had denied his application, but because, for the first time, he finally understood exactly what he'd almost lost. Ryan sat there for a long time, staring at the folded letter. No one spoke. The silence in Patricia's office felt heavier than any argument ever could. Finally, Ryan looked up. Dad, I've spent 6 years believing I was protecting this business. He gave a bitter laugh. The truth is, I was protecting an image. He didn't answer. He wasn't talking to me anymore. He was talking to himself. Vanessa quietly wiped her eyes. I never should have sent that message, she whispered. I was frustrated, and I took it out on you. She looked directly at me. I'm sorry, Walter. I nodded politely. Appreciate you saying that. Then I looked at both of them. But apologies don't rebuild trust. They only open the door. What happens next is your choice. Ryan slowly nodded. I understand. Patricia closed the file in front of her. I think we're finished here. As we stood to leave, Ryan hesitated. Dad, would you have ever told me? Told you what? That I didn't own any of it. Smiled sadly. I was waiting for the day you asked. You never did. The following Monday, something unusual happened. I drove to the original Route 9 diner for breakfast. Normally, Ryan didn't arrive until after 9. That morning, his truck was already there. It was barely 7. When I walked inside, I found him wearing an apron, not standing in the office, not talking to investors. He was in the kitchen, scrubbing the old flat-top grill with both hands. Maria, a waitress who'd worked for us for 23 years, looked at me and smiled. He got here before everyone else. He said the grill should have never been replaced. Ryan looked over and noticed me. For a second, neither of us knew what to say. Then he quietly walked over. I found Mom's old maintenance notebook. He held it up. Every machine, every repair, every supplier. I recognized it instantly. Dorothy's handwriting covered every page. I spent all weekend reading it, he said. I had no idea how much work she did. Smiled. Most people didn't. He looked around the diner. I've been trying so hard to make this place look modern. I forgot what made people love it in the first place. He pointed toward the empty corner. The pie case. I ordered the exact same model yesterday. I raised an eyebrow. You did? He nodded, and I called every employee. The late paychecks stopped today. I canceled the consulting contracts. And he took a deep breath. I withdrew my own bonus. I'll use that money to cover payroll. For the first time in weeks, I saw something in my son that had been missing for years. Humility. Not because he said he had changed, but because his actions had quietly started proving it. As I turned to leave, Maria called after me, "Walter." I looked back. She smiled. It's good to have the old Hayes family back. Smiled. But deep inside, I knew one final decision still remained. A decision that would determine whether Ryan had truly changed, or whether this was only guilt talking. And that decision was already waiting inside Patricia's office. Ryan's changes continued, not for a week, not for a month, for 6 straight months. He stopped parking in the reserved space outside the diner. He started opening the restaurant himself every morning. He learned the names of every dishwasher, every waitress, every cook, people he'd worked beside for years, but had never truly seen. I watched quietly. I didn't compliment him. I didn't criticize him. Real change doesn't need applause. It only needs consistency. One Friday afternoon, Patricia called. "Walter." "Think it's time." I knew exactly what she meant. "I'll come by after lunch." She already had the documents waiting when I arrived. The same leather folder, the same conference room. Only this time, there was no tension, just quiet anticipation. Patricia slid one document toward me. "If you sign this, Ryan becomes the sole owner of Hayes Holdings." I looked at the signature line. One stroke of my pen, 45 years of work, would belong to someone else. Patricia waited. "So, are you ready?" Smiled. Then gently pushed the papers back across the table. "No." She looked surprised. "No? I've waited 45 years. I can wait a little longer." She leaned back. "Why?" I looked out her office window. "Because I still don't know whether Ryan has changed, or whether he's simply afraid of losing everything." There was a difference, a very big difference. Patricia slowly nodded. "So what now?" I reached into my jacket. I wrote him a letter. She looked confused. "A letter?" "Not from me." I carefully placed an old envelope on her desk. Across the front, in Dorothy's handwriting, were the words, "Open only after you've learned that family is worth more than inheritance." Patricia's eyes widened. "You had another letter?" Smiled softly. Dorothy always planned further ahead than I did. The next evening, I invited Ryan over for dinner, just the two of us. No business, no lawyers, no Vanessa, no grandchildren, just father and son. I cooked the same pot roast Dorothy used to make every Sunday. When Ryan walked into the dining room, He stopped. Only 2 plates sat on the table. He quietly smiled. This feels familiar. It should. It's been 20 years since we ate here alone. We sat down. For a while. We talked about ordinary things. Fishing, baseball, the weather. For the first time in years, it didn't feel forced. When dinner was over, stood up, walked to my study, and returned carrying the second envelope. Placed it in front of him. Ryan frowned. What's this? Smiled. The last thing your mother ever asked me to give you. Ryan looked at the handwriting. His eyes immediately filled with tears. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he looked at me. Dad, if that letter says I still haven't earned your trust, I'll understand. I quietly shook my head. You won't know until you read it. Ryan slowly slipped his finger beneath the seal. The room became completely silent as he unfolded the letter. Realized. The next few minutes would determine not just the future of Hayes Family Diner, but the future of our family. Ryan stared at the letter for several seconds before breaking the seal. His hands were trembling. The room was completely silent. Only the ticking of the old grandfather clock echoed through the house. He unfolded the paper. The moment he saw his mother's handwriting, his eyes filled with tears. He began reading. My dear Ryan, if your father has given you this letter, then you've already learned the hardest lesson I hoped life would never have to teach you. Your father never measured success by how much money he made. He measured it by whether he could come home each night knowing he had built something honestly. One day, everything your father and I built will belong to someone else. That's the way life works. But before anything belongs to you, ask yourself one question. If every building, every dollar, every diner disappeared tomorrow, would your father still be proud to call you his son? If the answer is yes, you've already inherited everything that matters. Love always. Mom. Ryan slowly lowered the letter. He couldn't speak. Finally, he looked at me. I spent years trying to inherit your business, when I should have been trying to become the kind of man who deserved it. Smiled. For the first time in a very long time, I believed him. I reached into my jacket and removed one final envelope. Ryan looked confused. What's that? I placed it on the table. The papers you thought this meeting was about. He looked down at them, then looked back at me. I don't want them. Smiled. Good, because that's exactly why you're finally ready. Ryan laughed through his tears. So, what happens now? Stood and walked toward the dining room window. Outside, the original Hayes Family Diner sign was glowing in the distance. 45 years, thousands of customers, millions of memories. Turned back toward my son. Tomorrow morning, we'll go to the diner together. Not as owner and employee, as father and son. And after that, we'll spend however many years I have left making sure the next generation understands something neither of us understood soon enough. Ryan stood up, without saying another word. He walked across the room and hugged me, not because of the business, not because of the papers, simply because, for the first time in years, he wanted his father I hugged him back, then quietly whispered, "I'm proud of you." Those 4 words meant more to him than every building I'd ever owned. 6 months later, the Route 9 diner looked exactly the way Dorothy loved it. The old pie case was back. The original menu had returned. The employees smiled again. Payroll was never late. Customers came back. Not because the building had changed, but because the people inside it had. One afternoon, my youngest granddaughter looked at an old photograph hanging on the wall. "Grandpa, who's the lady beside you?" Smiled. "That's your grandmother. Everything you're eating today started with her." My granddaughter smiled. I wish I could have met her. So do I. I looked toward the kitchen. Ryan was laughing with the cooks while helping wash dishes. He caught me watching, simply nodded. He nodded back. No words were needed, because sometimes the greatest inheritance a parent leaves behind isn't a business or a bank account. It's a second chance. And sometimes that's worth more than everything else combined. The end.